slammed publicly by the president.
It's really bizarre. You know, I mean, I look at this as someone who spent 13 years in the Justice Department as a career government lawyer, and it just goes against everything that the department stands for: independent law enforcement, integrity, just a way of doing public service that the president just doesn't seem to understand. And the difficulty is that the people in the Justice Department will continue to do their job, they'll work on their cases, they'll do their work, but at the political levels, it just is so beyond inappropriate, doesn't cover what it is that the president's doing. And this goes back, you know, he's been in office now for a year, so one could say early in his administration, he doesn't understand independent law enforcement, he doesn't understand the boundaries that are supposed to exist between a president trying to pressure independent law enforcement leadership. But now, a year in, that excuse just really doesn't hold anymore. And so now, when he verbally attacks, whether it's senior FBI officials or whether it's his own attorney general that he selected and was nominated for this position, it just really demonstrates that he is actually, in my opinion, trying to influence the Justice Department's operations.
Well, if he wants to get rid of the attorney general, he's the president. He can fire him, and he can make that happen. He doesn't want to do that. He wants to, in effect, ridicule him so much that he resigns.
Well, that could be one of the things he's trying to do. I mean, we do know that despite the "you're fired" slogan of his reality show, the president doesn't actually like to fire people. He does tend to do this to people. We saw him do it a little bit with Reince Priebus when he was chief of staff, where he sort of openly challenges them and undermines them and undercuts them such that they want to resign. There was a sense that he might be starting to do that with John Kelly a few weeks ago, although I think that's over now. But I think, you know, it's also possible that he is trying to do just what Kerry said, which is essentially keep him there and lean on him and really pressure him to do otherwise. And I think what we saw in the statement yesterday, the reason that Sessions put it out is because he's actually pushing back on that notion that, you know, you can insult me all you want, but I'm not, you know, as long as I'm here, I'm going to do this job the way I think it should be done.
I mean, isn't it rich that the president gets furious and insulted by somebody who pushes back at him when he says, you know, I'm somebody who punches back, you know, I don't let anything go unanswered. And for the first time, Jeff Sessions showed that he was pushing back on the president, and suddenly the president goes ballistic about it. You know, this has been going on since last July. There are people who are advising the president legally who are telling him, you know, you cannot fire anybody right now. You are in the middle of an investigation. You cannot fire Jeff Sessions right now. This would look really bad for you. So I think he's doing, as you're saying, I mean, he's just publicly trolling Jeff Sessions.
And who is he really going to replace him with at this point? I mean, what are the chances that he could get a new attorney general nominee through the Senate at this point? There are none. So he has really no good options here.
It also does, though.
We're just getting word in. Gloria, I want to get your reaction. The U.S. ambassador to Mexico, Roberta Jacobson, a career diplomat, has announced she will be resigning. I will be departing at the beginning of May in search of other opportunities. Comes at a time when tensions between the United States and Mexico pretty significant. The president, Enrique Peña Nieto, supposedly planning a trip here later this month, but after ugly phone call with the president in the last few days, apparently decided this is not a good time. The president's still insisting that Mexico pay for the wall.
Right. So he canceled the trip. I don't know the specifics of this, but I'm presuming the U.S. ambassador believes that that she's not doing any good, that her effectiveness is over. And that if the president's going to try and handle these relations, what is she doing there? And she probably disagrees. I mean, it's, you know, again, I say this just off the top of my head. I haven't done any reporting
31 years as a career diplomat and making this announcement just now.
Right, and Roberta Jacobson, I think, as well as Jared Kushner, by the way, and many of the officials who've been working on the U.S.-Mexico relationship were actually, they thought they were making some progress toward a visit where they could make some announcements about, you know, common border moves, something on trade, something on drug interdiction, and they knew that they had to get this phone call done before they could schedule a trip. But I think they thought this was really just going to be a rubber stamp on that opportunity, and instead the president's insistence on his own agenda, which is a political agenda, has really derailed this. And so if you're a diplomat, it's like, what am I even doing here?
It comes at a time when so many career diplomats have resigned over the past year for a variety of reasons. All right, everybody stick around. There's a lot more we're following. He says he's the biggest fan of the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, but now it seems President Trump may be embracing gun control, leaving some lawmakers and his base scratching their heads.
You wouldn't accept an incomplete job.
The wild, wild West Wing.
Another day, another scandal, another resignation.
Hope Hicks abruptly announcing she is resigning.
The president may have berated her for being honest.
Jared Kushner has heat on him.
You're seeing Jared Kushner meeting with executives in the White House, and then the companies are giving very sizable mortgages to his company.
The existing battle lines have been entrenched by this decision from the chief of staff to essentially strip Jared Kushner of his security clearance.
Josh Rafael is leaving the White House. He essentially served as the point man for Jared Kushner and for Ivanka Trump.
And Attorney General Jeff Sessions pushing back after the president calls his handling of complaints against the FBI disgraceful.
I wouldn't stay at all. I wouldn't be anybody's whipping boy.
Trey Gowdy is demanding answers from Ben Carson after a $31,000 dining room set was purchased for his office.
America's cyber chief says President Trump has not given him the order to disrupt Russian cyber threats.
President Putin has clearly come to the conclusion there's little price to play here.
Bingo. Special counsel Robert Mueller is looking at the president's business dealings in Russia before the campaign.
Paul Manafort is pleading not guilty to money laundering and false statements.
Take the guns first, go through due process second.
Joe, are you ready?
Can you do that? Joe, can you do that?
There's a culture of fear inside the White House.
And all that was just over the past 48 hours. An administration clearly struggling to deal with one crisis after another. Among the new developments, the resignation of one of the president's most trusted confidants, the White House Communications Director, Hope Hicks. Also, sources say special counsel Robert Mueller's team is asking questions about comments made by Hicks when she denied the campaign had any contacts with the Russians. And Jared Kushner's business dealings are under new scrutiny. The New York Times says Kushner's family real estate company got $500 million in loans after meetings at the White House. Meanwhile, the person brought in to try to calm all the chaos may be having some regrets about taking the job. Here's what the White House Chief of Staff John Kelly said during an event over at the Department of Homeland Security today. He used to work there. Listen.
I have almost no right to be up here on the stage. I mean, I was in the department.
You have every right
and
to
I
be.
miss every one of you every day. I went. Truly, at 6 months, the last thing I wanted to do was walk away from one of the great honors of my life, being the Secretary of Homeland Security. But I did something wrong, and God punished me, I guess.
All right, let's bring in our chief White House correspondent, Jim Acosta. Jim, so what details have you learned about Hope Hicks's resignation and how it played out?
Some four-star deadpan there from General Kelly, Wolf. Yes, that's right. We are hearing from people inside and outside the White House, close to this White House, that this White House is essentially in a state of turmoil right now, that the president is deeply upset about the events of the last 24 to 48 hours. However, you do talk to people, and I just spoke with a source close to the White House a few moments ago who said the president is just fine and this is just another day at the office for President Trump. Keep in mind, Wolf, and you and I both know this, having covered President Trump for some time now, that he is accustomed to dealing in an atmosphere of chaos, and in some ways he feels right at home in that kind of environment. And so that was what this one source I just spoke to was alluding to a few moments ago. But make no doubt about it here, Wolf. There is a very big sense inside the White House that the wheels, to some extent, are coming off. When you see somebody like Hope Hicks, the communications director, a trusted aide and confidant of the president, stepping aside after working with him for so many years, it's hard to draw any other conclusion. Now, from what we understand from talking to our sources, this was in the works for some time. There is nothing nefarious about her departure, one White House official said to us. But, Wolf, we learned late last night that the Mueller investigation, that the special counsel's office has been asking asking people going into speaking with the special counsel's attorneys and investigators that those investigators are asking about a comment made by Hope Hicks just 2 days after the election to the New York Times, in which she says there were no foreign contacts except for those that came around election night congratulating the president. We now know, of course, that that was not the case. There were multiple contacts between Trump campaign associates and the Russians. But I did talk to a former Trump campaign official who has spoken with the special counsel's office as well as the House and Senate Intelligence Committees, who told me that, yes, they are asking that question. And so it does sound as if Hope Hicks will have to be dealing with this for some time to come. But at the same time, the White House is planning for her departure. They say that she'll be here for the next several weeks. No firm date on when she'll be finally leaving here at the White House. And of course, we heard from the president yesterday in that statement, that written statement, that he's sort of leaving the door open to working with her in the future. No word yet whether that means she'll work in the 2020 campaign, although we are hearing from some sources that that is something that could definitely happen. Wolf.
We're also learning, Jim, that the president is fuming over his Attorney General, Jeff Sessions. Tell us why.
Well, this has been going on for months now, Wolf. Almost a year ago, the president started to really get upset with the Attorney General because he felt that Jeff Sessions was just not enough of a defender. The president was almost expecting Jeff Sessions to act as a personal lawyer or White House counsel, perhaps not really understanding that the job of Attorney General is to uphold the law and Constitution of the United States over at the Justice Department. And it seems that Jeff Sessions is determined to do just that. You saw that statement that he issued yesterday, which seemed to be in direct response to the president tweeting at Jeff Sessions, berating him once again. And of course, what we've been hearing from our sources and what we're reading in the Washington Post, we saw that late last night from the Washington Post, that the president is really just fuming behind the scenes about Jeff Sessions, referring to him as Mr. Magoo and so on. It's unclear how long these two can work together. But, one thing that we have to keep in mind, Wolf, the president does at times also thank Jeff Sessions for being one of his first supporters, first big name supporters during the campaign. And, of course, he has a number of key staffers from Sessions' world, and one very prominently, Stephen Miller, who works here at the White House for the president. So they have many ties between these two men. But at the same time, it's very clear that Jeff Sessions has gotten under the president's skin, Wolf.
Yeah, Jeff Sessions may have been the first U.S. senator to endorse Donald Trump for the Republican nomination. But since then, we've checked. The president has called the Attorney General an idiot, beleaguered, very weak, very disappointed with him. He did a terrible thing, and only yesterday, disgraceful. All that happening over these many months. Sessions still, though, on the job. We'll see how long that lasts. All right, thanks very much, Jim Acosta, over at the White House. The resignation of Hope Hicks will leave a significant void in President Trump's inner circle and adds to the chaos in the West Wing. The former White House Communications Director Anthony Scaramucci, he was on the job for about 10 days, says morale is bad and getting worse.
What does that mean? What do you think is going
on? There's a fear, culture of intimidation. People afraid to talk to each other.
Coming from the president? They're afraid of the president?
No, I think it's the chief of staff. I think there's a culture of fear inside the White House. If the current situation and the current culture inside the administration stays exactly the way it is, right, there's literally no change, there will be a lot more departures. Yeah, the morale is at an all-time low, and it's trending lower.
Hope Hicks is among more than a dozen top departures from the White House, from the Trump White House. Let's get some perspective on all of this. Joining us, we have CNN legal analyst Carrie Cordero, CNN political analyst Julie Hirschfeld-Davis, and our chief political analyst Gloria Borger. What do you make of all this turmoil, these departures?
Even by Trump standards, I think it's bad. I mean, we have different standards for the Trump administration because it's always in chaos. It's the way Trump governs. It's the way he likes to run his White House. But today, when we saw a president effectively go rogue on his own kind of economic advisors to change the subject, I would argue, and say, okay, we're going to impose a 25% tariff on steel, and 10% tariff on aluminum. While these internal arguments are going on inside his White House, he sets up this meeting. He says, I want to get this done. And it's very clear to me that there is a revolt going on and that the president's the one who went rogue. He went rogue on Republicans yesterday. During that open session on gun control, he sounded more like Barack Obama than any Republican I know. He's lost Hope Hicks, who, as one source said to me, is his emotional support. And this source also predicted that the president would head into a tailspin without Hope Hicks, and that may, in fact, be what we are witnessing.
She supposedly, Hope Hicks, started thinking about resigning after that whole Rob Porter scandal erupted, the former White House staff secretary who was accused of marital abuse, 2 ex-wives, and we saw those pictures, and she was having an affair with him at the time.
Well, right. And I mean, that just points up the level of chaos that she's been dealing with for many, many months, not dating back before the inauguration, even into the campaign. These are incredibly stressful jobs, but certainly with the focus on Rob Porter and then with the Mueller investigation going on in the background, and she's clearly a focus of the special counsel's questions. She knew she was going to have to be interviewed. She's been dealing with that. She had to get a lawyer, just like many West Wing aides have had to do. That's an enormous amount of pressure, so I think this was on her mind. And while that testimony that she gave on the Hill, where she said behind closed doors that she had at times told white lies for the president, didn't precipitate this, it does underscore what the pressures that have been on her, and the fact that, you know, being part of Trump's inner circle is a super pressurized environment. And I think for the president, the reason that we're seeing him sort of lash out like this and really seem to take these departures to heart is that the circle of people around him who know him well and with whom he feels comfortable is really shrinking. Now his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, is under all this scrutiny. This story that we ran today about his business dealings and whether, and he's now been stripped of his clearance. Will he stay? Will he be able to stay? He's feuding with John Kelly behind the scenes. The number of people around the president who he can really trust and confide in is shrinking, and that is not a good feeling if you're sitting in the Oval Office.
That New York Times story, Carrie, I mean, actually, you're a legal analyst. While he was serving in the White House, among those who were brought in for various meetings, executives from 2 major lending operations, big capital companies, who wound up lending, $500 million or so to Kushner family business properties. And the suggestion is that's inappropriate.
Well, it's inappropriate, and the difficulty is that this White House has unfortunately just sort of set aside many of the ethics rules that have been consistent throughout administrations of both political parties. So ethics rules apply to White House individuals, senior executive branch officials, and there is both the actual potential conflict, whether or not there actually was any knowledge of his part or his family's business, those who are supposed to be running the business now, about these loans, and then there's the appearance of conflict, and both of those from a senior leadership position in government are things that officials should be concerned with. Unfortunately, with Jared Kushner, it looks like they tend to disregard ethics, security clearance rules, and these established norms.
He's the son-in-law, in addition to being the presidential's a senior advisor, but there are a lot of people out there who's suggesting his days are numbered.
Well, including perhaps the Wall Street Journal in an editorial today. I think that Jared Kushner, no matter how much his people push back on this, would have a difficult time doing the job he's been assigned to do, i.e. peace in the Middle East, relations with Mexico, without having this kind of clearance. And I think that these stories show that there's a different set of rules for some people. And I think, you know, that contributes to the chaos and the resentment inside the White House about Jared Kushner and perhaps even about Ivanka. And I think that's why you see a president that's so sort of besieged here. He's lashing out at his attorney general. He's got a son-in-law that's got real problems. He's got a Russia investigation that is asking questions about his relationship with the Russians, of some witnesses. I mean, you know, this is a president who is getting it from all ends and wants to project to the American public that he is in charge. Yeah. And he can do what he wants to do.
Well, and in a way, all of this is in the same sort of category of the chickens coming home to roost. Let's not forget, more than a year ago, we were all writing stories about nepotism, and was it even appropriate for Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump to be working in the White House at all. Now we see an instance of where this has really become a major conflict inside the White House and outside. And also, you know, the Rob Porter situation, they now lack a staff secretary. That's where you get things like the president going rogue and saying he's going to do something on tariffs when the paperwork isn't ready and all the lawyers are saying, hang on a second, this is not
paperwork isn't ready, but he made the announcement today, even though it's not ready. He said, we'll make the announcement next week, but here's what we're going to do next week. And I'm sure that some of his aides were pretty stunned by that.
So ad hoc.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't run a White House or policy in an ad hoc way. It doesn't work.
Stand by. Everybody stand by. There's a lot more coming up, more on the chaos that isn't necessarily contained simply to the West Wing of the White House. It's also spilling over into the Justice Department as President Trump fumes over his Attorney General, who he has reportedly named Mr. Magoo. Plus, a fresh threat in the global arms race. President Putin of Russia unveils Russia's new line of nuclear weapons that he calls invincible. And surviving the slave trade. Why life as a freed man is still a daily struggle. Our new CNN exclusive report. You'll want to see this. That's coming up.
Around here, I'm lucky to get through a shift without a disaster.
Heads up.
Ooh.
We didn't address. Don't change that.
Okay, are you going to leave that?
We didn't address it, Mr. President. Look, I think
you know why? Because you're afraid of the NRA, right?
And the president certainly didn't stop there. Not only did he call out members of his own party on live television, he also appeared to side with Democrats at times during that meeting. Listen to this.
Diane, if you could add what you have also, and I think you can, into the bill.
Yeah. So Joe, are you ready?
Can you do that? Joe, can you do that? Pat, can you add some of the things? You're not going to agree with.
Yeah, if you help.
Well, no, I'll help.
All right, joining us now, Democratic Congressman Steve Cohen of Tennessee. Congressman, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome, Wolf. Nice to be on CNN.
I don't know. Thank you. I don't know if you had a chance to watch that 1 hour live presentation.
The campaign, when he said nice things about Planned Parenthood, and he sounded like a Democrat when he said nice things about the Dreamers. But when a Republican, and really not a traditional Republican, he's a Trumper.
But he was willing to challenge the NRA on some pretty sensitive issues. That, I assume, you welcome.
I do welcome it, and I hope it bears fruition, and I hope he follows through on it. But he doesn't get to the finish line. He'll
listen to this one.
Take the firearms first and then go to court, because that's another system. First, go through due process second.
He was talking about the mentally ill, and he thinks that in some cases it's better for police to simply, for example, if President Obama had suggested the same thing.
Oh, well, he'd have been against it entirely and said, and you deserve due process. The terrorist list, it denied them due process. So they were for due process for suspected terrorists, and now Trump's not for due process for people with weapons, and that's not going to go over well at all. It was astonishing to hear him say that, but I don't think he knows what due process is. I think he thinks it's maybe a beverage like Mountain Dew.
Do you think there's a chance that we'll pass some significant gun control legislation anytime soon?
Certainly, I would hope so. And I was pleased that Democrats went there and they did what they needed to do to put the ideas forward on common sense, universal background checks and changing the age and for buying assault weapons and other proposals. But when it gets down to it, I doubt the Republicans will put it on the floor with an open bill to allow amendments, because things might pass that they wouldn't want to have happen. And when it gets time to Paul Ryan and the Rules Committee, the NRA will rule, and I don't think we'll have much to vote on. But I certainly hope we will. Trump sounded good yesterday, but getting Paul Ryan and the Republicans to have a vote will be much, much more difficult.
Let me ask you about the president's son-in-law and senior advisor, Jared Kushner. As you know, the New York Times is now reporting that his family's real estate business secured more than $500 million in loans after Kushner held meetings at the White House with some of those lenders who participated. What's your reaction to that?
What a coincidence. It's just amazing, you know, that these things could happen, that people could meet with Kushner, who is an owner of those companies. The White House should be beyond reproach like Caesar's wife, and they're not. In fact, that they just invite criticism, and it started with President Trump not divesting himself of resolution HRS 621 because of violations of Trump on the emoluments clause, both domestic and foreign. He set the ethical low bar or no bar for members of his family and his administration to follow, and Kushner's followed, took the job running the campaign and said he didn't want any money. He needed influence and the money he could get from the oligarchs through that influence, and I'm sure that was responsible for taking he got paid for. Same thing for Kushner. The salary is chicken feed. It's what you can make out of the job. It's called a grifter.
His son-in-law, Jared Kushner, does not take a federal government salary in his job as senior advisor to the president. Just a little nugget there. Hey, Congressman Steve Cohen, thanks so much for joining us.
You're welcome, Wolf. Have a good one.
You too. Coming up, a retired U.S. ambassador calls out the State Department, vowing sexual harassment has been running rampant there for years. Plus, a show of nuclear force today in Russia as President Putin unveils a missile system he claims is capable of hitting any place on the.
That's of all Americans. Nearly 6 in 10 Americans think the president is a racist. Look what happens when you break that down by race. 47% of whites, nearly half of whites, think the president is a racist. 84% of African Americans think the president is a racist. 3/4 of Hispanics believe the president is a racist. It is just a stunning, every day we talk about things we never thought we would ever talk about. But if you are, I would hope if you are the president of the United States and you see those numbers, you would spend a little quiet time, put the phone down and not tweet, and think about why is it that nearly 6 in 10 citizens of my country think I'm a racist.
You know, I see two things happening in the electoral climate. Gender gap, and Democrats are also heartened by this idea that when in their polling, one of the main problems that people are raising about President Trump and the Republican Party is intolerance. Right. There is a sense in the country of the party and the president being intolerant. It's being clearly reflected in polls, and it's going to play a big role in this midterm election.
Even 21% of Republicans. 21% of Republicans say the president is a racist. And to your point, think about that. African Americans, Latino Americans don't like this president. And then look at the poll we released earlier this week. President's approval rating among women. Only 32% of women approve, 63% disapprove. Younger voters, 18 to 34, only 26% approve of the president's performance, 67% disapprove. But just do the math, the demographic math for this president, but also the Republican Party long term. Right. That is so devastating.
It is, and I'm sure Republican leaders are looking at polls like this and really sweating the midterm elections, frankly, because right now Democrats are energized. They really want to vote, and then you're looking at the president. You will see how much the president is out on the campaign trail. That will also be a reflection in going into August, those later months. See who wants to stand next to this person who the majority of the country thinks is a racist.
The cautionary tale here is that the last campaign was fought on this battleground. It was fought on the question of temperament and intolerance. It didn't quite get them there. So the question is this enough for Democrats to really overcome Trump's personality, the force of it?
That's why I said at the beginning you would think the president would take some quiet time and think about this, but you're right, because what he would say normally when these questions come up is, as we've heard before, I'm president, you're not. He has won. Thanks for joining us in Inside Politics today. See you back here this time tomorrow. Wolf starts after a quick break. Have a good day.
Dear great-great-grandfather, you made moonshine.
Or most.
We've been here for 13 months, but hope is one of those unbroken threads between the early days of the primary campaign, all through the campaign, on the plane, practically every day, including on weekends, with candidate Trump, during transition with him and with us, and certainly here since day one of the administration.
All that means she'll be hard to replace, and it means more West Wing turmoil and turnover. Friends say Hicks has talked for months of finding the exit. But the timing here is what it is. She told the president she was leaving the day after, spending 9 hours taking questions from the House Intelligence Committee. You hear all this talk today, it's like losing a limb. He trusts nobody more. She's his sounding board. Is that puffery exaggerated, or is that fact?
That's fact. It's hard to understand how the White House will move forward without hope, in part because of how she is such a constant for the president. And he has so few of those left now. Beyond just being close to the president, she's close to his family. She is practically like his family. She's a rare person in a dual role who is like a daughter, but also works for him, really works for him. When he needs something done, he goes to Hope. So there are a lot of questions about what happens with President Trump. How does he manage his day-to-day without someone there who can execute for him in the way that he wants them to, who he trusts? But then there's also a question of what does this mean for the rest of them? If Hope can't take it anymore and has decided to call it quits, then what does it mean for all the rest of the folks there who have an even more tenuous attachment to the president?
And that's the personnel question and the president's own zeitgeist, if you will, his mood question. The conversation among the white-collar attorneys who swap information about the Mueller investigation, trying to figure out where it's going, that is that they think she's in considerable jeopardy, or she's at least of considerable interest. Again, because of that unique role, this is just a partial list of the things that Hope Hicks is central to as Bob Mueller tries to answer questions. What does she know about the question, did the Trump campaign know about the hacked DNC Clinton emails before they were released to the public? Did they get a heads up? Did the campaign deliberately mislead about Russia contacts? Trump's mindset in firing James Comey, attacking the Department of Justice, FBI, Special Counsel, Jeff Sessions. She's there in the room when the president is doing this venting and fuming. She's a consistent bridge between Trump and his sons and the Trump organization, including being part of that Air Force One meeting to craft Donald Trump Jr.'s statement. The initial statement was misleading about the June 2016 Trump Tower meeting with Russians. So she's leaving the White House. In an odd way, if you're the president, you're going to miss her for advice and counsel, but are you also going to be a little bit nervous that somebody who is so central to many of these questions in the investigation is now not at the office across the hall?
I mean, I think to some degree it's just only natural that you would be. Look, there's never been any sense that there's any break between the two of them. There's never been any sense that she would go astray of whatever the president's wishes are. I just think that the natural inclination is you would want somebody in-house, in your office, in the same place they've been for the better part of the last 2.5 years, whether as a security blanket that she's always been for him, whether as a sounding board that she's always been for him, and then also because you would know, presumably, what she would be talking to people about throughout. And I think that's a shift in whether or not anything actually comes from that. And again, I certainly haven't heard that anything would, and I find it hard to believe, given her relationship with the president and the family, that there would be any split there. I think it would just be a natural sense for the president to be a little bit concerned, or at least the team to be a little bit concerned.
I wouldn't suggest for a second that she's going to turn on the president, but if there's something in the truth that is trouble, and she's a witness.
Well, I think we saw a little bit of that after her testimony, where she said she told little white lies for the president, and the president reportedly wasn't happy about that. There's some dispute of whether she was yelled at or not, or whether he was just unhappy. But I think that's a crack. He sees that as a crack in the loyalty. Right. And for this president, given how much she's seen, given how much she's been a part of, that's problematic, and that has to be scary.
He issued a statement yesterday saying how awesome she was and how incredible. I don't say that disrespectfully, how much she meant to him.
That's probably true.
It's probably true. Another part of this is she is unique, innermost, as I said, but it's also part of this continuing churning at the White House. Just last year, 34% of people in the Trump highest first-year staff turnover of the last 5 presidents, according to this study here in the Brookings Institution. Now, already this year, not included in those numbers, Hope Hicks, Rob Porter, Dina Powell, Josh Rafael, Jeremy Katz, Reed Cordish. Many of you at home don't know these names, but these are people who are close to the president, trust of the president, trust of Jared and Ivanka. What does this mean in this White House that here we go, more churn?
I think in terms of legal jeopardy is one thing with Hope Hicks, but it just contributes to the isolation of the president. And I think this is also part of what you're seeing with the upheaval over there right now. This is someone he had full trust in, and trusted her to, carry out his orders, even if she had to commit some white lies. And I think that this is, right now, Ivanka is the person who's closest to him there, and so who can he go to on the staff and say, his innermost thoughts, and that they'll help him out there.
And so listen, again, consider the source. But the person who had the communications director job for about 10, 12 minutes before Hope Hicks got their job, Anthony Scaramucci, he's still in touch with a lot of people inside the White House, and he says Hope Hicks is leaving at a time of incredibly bad morale, and he blames the chief of staff.
I think it's the chief of staff. I think there's a culture of fear inside the White House, and people are afraid to talk to each other. The morale's terrible. And the reason why the morale's terrible is that the rule by fear and intimidation does not work in a civilian environment. And so here we are. It's messed up. It'll be up to the president to figure out if he wants to fix it or not. I predict more departures.
And here we are. It's messed up. And as Mr. Scaramucci says, up to the president to fix it. This is like watching a soap opera.
Yeah.
This is like, you know, forgive me for my child, this is like Luke and Laura. You can tune in every day to check in on the relationship, and you check in, if you watch it a year later, you didn't miss anything. Every day. The place is messed up. The president should fix it. But this one, targeting Kelly, culture of fear.
And to think that John Kelly was actually brought in to bring an end to that. And in fact, he has become the center of that. And it's because, you know, everything in this White House is about factions. Everything is about whose side are you on, who wants you in and who wants you out. And John Kelly is now, we know as a fact, no exception to that. And that's, and maybe that doesn't say as much about John Kelly as it says about President Trump, who is the one constant in this whole thing. But it's problematic. Anthony Scaramucci was fired by Kelly. He has allies who are still in the building, who maybe are still concerned about their fate under Kelly, and that's what he's voicing.
Hope Hicks and Sarah Sanders among the people who I don't have to call allies, but who talked repeatedly. Jared Kushner, who talked repeatedly. A lot of people. One of the questions in town is will Hope Hicks leaving for whatever reason bring a more traditional White House? Will the president go to a more traditional operation where it's not all family, friends, Trump Organization insiders?
Yeah, the counter to kind of how bad this could be for the president given his relationship with Hope is the fact that they don't run a traditional communications operation from a long-term planning perspective, right? In a traditional White House, the communications director is setting things up both strategically and on messaging for weeks and months in advance. That's what we've always seen, and that's what this White House has never had, whether the communications directors either didn't exist, didn't have the power, or were Hope, who obviously had a ton of different things to be doing. When you talk to people on Capitol Hill, one of their biggest frustrations is they're never totally sure what's coming, they're never totally sure what's happening, and they don't really have a sense from a long-term planning perspective of how to message whatever the issue is of the day. And going into a midterm election, they'd really like that information if they could get it. Perhaps there is a possibility that the new communications director could do that. The obvious kind of caveat to that is the president doesn't necessarily operate like that on a daily basis, so it's a little bit difficult to have a job where you're planning 2, 4, 6 weeks in advance.
And we're in the middle of a midterm election year where a lot of the good communications people have been taken up by the campaigns, and they have reluctance to go into this White House because of this constant churning and volcanic opportunity.
I think that you're also going to see this going forward in all sorts of places. People aren't wanting to go into this administration. I hear this all the time at agencies. They're having a really difficult time recruiting people for, you know, what would normally be in Washington really highly desirable jobs.
What's up? All right, everybody hold their breath. More to come. Up next, lawmakers from both sides of the aisle meet with the president on a brainstorming session on guns, and they find a bit of common ground, but here's their question. Where's the president really stand?
Liberty